how do we apply this to business? How do we apply this to like trying to figure out our relationships or whatever it is? Anytime I think we find ourselves in a moment of questioning, is my plan still good enough? We talked about we need to be Bayesian. When the facts change, I change my mind. But you don't want to adjust your priors too soon and be wrong. You don't want to adjust the plan needlessly. So how do you know when the right time to adjust the plan is? And I think, Brian, what you've talked about is the right time to adjust the plan is when you notice the inversion happening or when you can start to feel the tremors that the inversion is about to happen. The opponent is doing things that you did not expect them to do. The plan probably needs to change.
Yeah, you're in this, the analogy of like when your competitors start using your own stuff against you, when the competitors start to succeed at things that you thought you were going to succeed at. But I wonder if it's almost something like, can you recognize when a threat, when a new change in the environment, when a change in the dynamics is big enough that your original goal might not even matter anymore, like might not be the right goal, right? When you get to the point where like, oh, this might not work and doubling down on it might be worse, right? There's still a point probably in this movie where Hans Gruber could just like take what's left of his team and just get out, right? Just like escape, change the plan enough that they can just get away. But he doesn't. He won't let go of the big mission, which may or may not be achievable. And so he just keeps getting farther and farther into trouble. Can we think of like sort of business analogs of this situation or practical analogs of that, like blindness to a threat?
So, of course, the onset of all the new technology, internet and AI and stuff like that over the past couple of decades, there's probably a million different examples of that. One that comes to mind is that a transformation coach always used to tell us about that we had is he used to work at Motorola, and he worked as a quality engineer at Motorola earlier in his career. And one of the things that he experienced was the transition from analog to digital. And the Motorola was so sure that the analog cellular way that we were doing things was the way and that they were the best at that thing. They did not adjust fast enough to the outside environment. They were like, well, other people can do this digital and that's a separate thing. And, that's going to be their core competency, rather than recognizing that that threat was coming for them and that it was inevitable at that point. It's just a failure to change the plan based on the things that are happening outside.
Right. No, that makes sense. I think the other classic example that people always talk about is like Kodak, which was like the camera company and the film company and synonymous with the entire industry, actually invented digital photography, but didn't internally support it because it was a threat to their core business, and so they let it go, and then it turned out to kill them. And I love that because it's got the analogy of like the thing that defeats the terrorists, the criminals in this movie. The reason that Hans doesn't win is John McClane using all of his weapons against him, like the plastic explosives and the guns. Everything that John uses is stuff that he found in the building or that he took from his enemies. Right, like the idea that you're sort of bringing your own downfall with you and have to guard against like it being used in ways that you didn't expect. It has a fun symmetry to it, but it's also sort of a real thing, right? If you're the expert in a thing and you're bringing these tools to bear, but then you don't recognize how disruptive they're going to be, you might stay attached to the wrong mission too long.
Yeah, so how do we identify what is a threat that's worth responding to and what is a distraction? We talked about one way that we can do that, which is looking for the inversion. But oftentimes the inversion is still a reaction. If you're waiting to see an inversion, if you're waiting to see the opponent do something that you didn't expect, then you inevitably have had to wait for them to have already done something that you didn't expect. How do you get ahead of that and know when we just need to stick to the plan versus, okay, the plan might need to change right now?
Right. And so like some playbook for that might be like we talked about in the last episode is if you're surrounding yourself with competent people, if you are seeking out strong advisors and people that have more experience than you in different domains, like you can kind of keep checking the plan. Like, hey, this thing is happening. Does this still seem like a good idea? How big of a threat is that really? Right. But I feel like the biggest test is just to be testing like, is my big picture plan still achievable? Is this still the right goal that we're going after? Or is something gotten big enough of a threat that actually calls into question whether we're even working on the right thing? Right? If it's just that somebody else is working a little bit harder, or somebody else had an early win, or we had an early failure, like that might be okay. But if the early failure illuminates that, like, actually your goal may not be achievable anymore or might not be worthwhile when you get there, how do you not hold on to that too long? I think is, you can't be too optimistic. You don't want to spend all your time planning for alternate paths, but you do want to, like, just be very pragmatic about, like, are we going to get there or not?
Yeah, and I think you're right. That is the primary concern. It's just making sure that you're staying on mission. And does the mission need to change? Do we need to rephrase the A00, whatever you want to say, right? Is our core objective still intact? And is it even the highest priority thing that we should work on right now? Like you said, because Hans probably should have worked out a different strategy, which is now the plan is we need to take out McLean and we need to get out of here. And if we can get the money, great. But if not, we probably just need to live to fight another day. Now, the other side of that, Brian, is okay, well, what if the mission is still in line? What if the mission hasn't changed? Our core business is still needing to go a certain direction, or at least we need to go after this market or something like that. And in that situation, I think what's helpful is to put your futurist hat on. Okay, what does a futurist do? A futurist looks at what could happen and says, okay, well, now I have some information that's suggesting maybe this future is possible. I don't know when necessarily. It might be 5 years, it might be 2 years, whatever. But maybe there's a future possible where this gets flipped and our market share flips with our competitor, or our competitor is able to put out a product that has these features that we thought were impossible, something like that. You imagine that future. And then what does a futurist do? A futurist looks for precursors. Okay, I need to back myself through the process. John McClane is a threat to me. What would it take for him to foil the mission entirely? Well, it would take him either stopping us from breaking into the safe. It would take him taking out Hans. It would take him freeing the hostages. It would take him foiling the FBI, taking out the electrical system. Like, it's going to take one of those things for him to do
Right.
it. Now, you just have to keep backing yourself back in terms of precursors.
Right. And we talked about in the last episode, right, the idea of if you've got the high level mission and you understand the building blocks that feed into that mission, like, yeah, if one of those building blocks is under severe threat, then that might be a problem you have to patch. But if, like, the succeeding of the high level mission or the value of the high level mission, if that's under threat, right, then it's time for some real soul searching and some pivoting. And we don't see that. We see everybody doubling down to the nth degree because it's a Hollywood action movie, right? And that's what makes it fun. The explosions have to get bigger, but we also see, like, yeah, despite the best laid plans and despite having all the skill set that seemed like it would be required, Hans Gruber runs up against opposition that was more committed and more creative than he expected and doesn't adapt accordingly.
It's almost interesting, though, now that I'm thinking about it, we're questioning should Hans have reacted sooner. And if you just put your futurist hat on and say, what would it take for John to be able to break through here? The way that I think about it oftentimes is what is the parlay that has to hit? So to put that in layman's terms, it's I need A to happen, B to happen, C to happen, D to happen, E to happen. So that's five legs, and each one they might stack on each other to be more likely after the first one happens or whatever, or some of them might be really, really long shots. Like our competitor would have to have a breakthrough in this technology that's thought impossible. Okay, like, is that really going to happen? So when you kind of think about that parlay that has to hit for a certain situation, that's where, I mean, I'll just put it in really simple terms that we think about. So one thing that really tying it back to football analytics and sports betting, you look at what people are really high on player A. People are really high on Isaiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs of this year, or something like that. Okay, well, they're taking him above other players in a draft. They're paying more for him. They're investing in his future. They're betting on his future, and it just keeps going up and up and up. And are they biased because he's on a really good team? Is he really capable of scoring all of these points or getting all these yards or whatever? And that's where you can put your futurist hat on and say, well, the parlay that has to hit for him to pay off at what people are currently investing in him, if you just think about it almost like a futures market, Like, what would
Yeah.
the parlay be for this guy to actually hit? It
Right.
starts to become really far fetched. You're like, well, the Chiefs, who are historically the team that passes the most in the NFL, would have to run the ball more. That's already a long shot to start with, and no other running back would have to get a lot of work. And the
He's not going
running
to get hurt. You know. Yeah.
touchdowns, exactly,
Yeah.
he's not
Yeah.
going to get hurt. Oh, by the way, he just got hurt.
Yeah. No, this is great because you can actually use this two different ways, right? We could say like Hans should have been doing this all along. Like, is it likely that we're going to succeed? Is it likely that McLean's going to succeed? What would it take, right? But actually, it occurs to me like their original plan is extremely detailed and really good and very and has all this wonderful elements to it, but it's pretty brittle. Like a lot of stuff has to happen in just the right order with like in just the right timeline, and that's why they're so freaked out when bad stuff starts happening is that they're like we've got 2 hours and then this has to be in place. And so the plan itself might have been a bit far-fetched, right? It's ridiculously far-fetched, let's be serious. Like this is a ridiculous movie, but even the context of the movie, like you can imagine like there should have been maybe a little bit more like, okay, there's a couple different ways that this could go down, not like we need these exact things to happen in this order. Right. So a little bit of overconfidence in the quality of the plan might be part of the downfall here.
That's really good. I love that you brought that back to the opposite side. It's not just the threat that you can look at the parlay. It's like that plan. Don't We should not make plans that require that you hit a very long parlay in order for it to pay off. That's just you're taking way
Right.
too big of a risk there for the gain that you're going to get.
And so the story there is do at least a little bit of threat planning beforehand, right? Look at the weak points in your plan and the failure modes and just think about like how you could, what are you going to do if X, Y, and Z happens, if a competitor gets out ahead of you, if one of your pieces doesn't work, if the technology doesn't get developed in time or whatever. Like have some idea how you're going to react to those. So you don't have to invent them in the moment when they happen to you. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm completely surprised that not everybody cooperated with my plan. Like that's probably a fair criticism of Hans Gruber's unreasonable plan, as fun to watch as it is and as confident as he is. There's some stuff that had to happen in a very specific order here that was maybe a bit of a stretch.